I know you love earning travel rewards and cash back, and that's why you're going to love Rakuten. With Rakuten, you can earn cash back on everything you need to book your dream trip, hotels, flights, rental cars, experiences, and more, while still booking through your favorite travel sites. And don't worry, cash back can be earned on top of earning the credit card points and the hotel and airline loyalty points that matter most to you, depending on how you make your booking. Plus, with Rakuten, you can also earn cash back on groceries and other purchases like electronics, pet supplies, and more. And the best part, you can join today for free and start earning cash back on top of your travel rewards. Go to Rakuten.com or get the app. That's Rakuten, Rakuten. Rakuten, the most rewarding way to shop.
This episode is brought to you by TaxAct. Don't do your taxes alone. Join TaxAct's National Admin Night. Admin nights are social gatherings for getting through your to-do list. So get ready for a night of fun, finding deductions, and filing taxes with TaxAct, where you can file your federal and state return for just $49 through April 8. Let's get together and get them over with. Visit taxact.com/admin-night for details.
The single most important and most beneficial and honestly, like incredibly powerful thing that each of us can do when we travel is to really aim and do our best to make connections with people who live in that place, like have a really authentic human connection sort of experience with somebody who lives there.
That is Paige McClanahan, who is today's guest. She is the author of a new book called The New Tourist, Waking Up to the Power and Perils of Travel. We have an in-depth conversation today about the tourism industry. Why should you care? There are 3 reasons. First of all, you're going to get a little insight into how tourism has evolved historically. This will give you some context for where it's at today. You're also going to, secondly, learn how your travels may be impacting communities around the world. And third, how we can become what Paige calls a new tourist, giving us deeper travel experiences. A few destinations you'll explore through this wonderful conversation are the Red Light District in Amsterdam, Hawaii, Barcelona, and Liverpool. And it's all happening in today's episode right now. So buckle up, strap in. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Hey there, it's Jason here with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show, my friend. Thanks for hanging out, letting me bring a little travel into your ears today. This is the show to help you travel the world on your terms, to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. And it's long overdue, this conversation about tourism and the tourism industry, and I couldn't pick a better guest, a better expert than Paige McClanahan, who is an American journalist based in France, a regular contributor to the New York Times. Her travel journalism has been recognized by the Society of American Travel Writers and the North American Travel Journalists Association. She's lived in 5 countries since she left the U.S. back in 2008. And this new book, The New Tourist, really weaves together all of her skills into just an incredible story. And you heard some of the things you'll learn at the top through this conversation. In addition, we both discover during this chat that we have a love for a particular tourist trap. And that gets us into a conversation around tourist traps and some of the beauty behind them. It's a little bit of a sneak peek into how surprising and some of the twists and turns this conversation takes as we navigate the modern day tourism industry and what it means for us as travelers. You're going to get behind the scenes and learn Paige's process, how she actually wrote this book. She is a professional journalist, as I mentioned. How do you research and write a book and get it published? She'll share her best tips, why everyone is a travel influencer and how to do it right, and on and on. Stick around on the back end. I'm going to highlight a moment from this conversation that might make you breathe a little sigh of relief. Plus, 3 lessons from a recent trip I learned that can help you to have a fun and interesting travel experience on your next journey. One might even save you a ton of money or time, so stick around for that. In the meantime, Please enjoy my conversation with Paige. And don't forget, you can sign up over at zerototravel.com/newsletter for our free weekly newsletter to get all of the latest shows, episodes, some personal updates and things like that. It's totally free. Sign up over there. Thanks for listening. Please enjoy my conversation with Paige, and I'll see you on the other side, my friend. Cheers.
Delft, Den Haag Holland Spoor, Den Haag Laan van Nieuw-Oost-Indië en Amsterdam Centraal van 23:52.
Paige McClanahan, welcome back to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend. What a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I am so excited to be here, Jason.
One of my favorite guests, dare I say, one of my favorite people, and one of my favorite books. I really loved this book. We're going to talk about it today, The New Tourist, Waking Up to the Power and Perils of Travel. We've been hitting each other on WhatsApp a little bit, and I'm like, how do you do this? How do you compile so much information, keep it interesting, make it a page turner, and do it? I mean, that's a whole other question, I guess. We after writing the book, are you just like, what's the feeling? Is it just like, oh my gosh, I'm just glad that's done?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of, glad that's done. But also, had you asked me 2 years ago how to write a book, I would have said, honestly, Jason, I have no idea. I've just signed my contract to deliver a manuscript and I'm scared. I won't use an expletive. But yeah, it was really a process of learning by doing and kind of groping around in the dark. And I ended up doing a lot of writing that didn't end up in the book. Like I wrote 2 whole chapters that just didn't end up in the book. But it was okay. It was like it was the process that I needed to go through in order to produce this. So I really learned as I went, and I cut so much stuff. I have to say I'm happy with how it turned out, and I learned so much of the process.
You should be thrilled. It must be encouraging to some people listening, as we're all creating things on some level, right? Whether it's as simple as like trying to figure out like how to craft an email to get a job, or, anything. And it's just like nice to hear, okay, you can see on the surface, like you would think a published author, they know what they're doing.
Oh, he cries now.
Professional journalist for the New York Times, she knows what she's doing. But you have the same sort of fears and struggles as everybody else, right?
Yeah. And I remember I did this, masterclass, like a long time ago. I was doing, not a long time ago, a few years ago, I did a masterclass on fiction writing, which I hadn't done before. And I wanted to sort of experiment. And it was taught by Margaret Atwood on masterclass. And I still remember this. And it's something that I think of in all of my writing. She said something like, God created the trash can, for you, use it. It is there for you to use. Do not be afraid to throw things out. So hearing, this incredibly accomplished author say that was like, okay, yeah. It's okay to start and then have to backtrack. That's sometimes the only way to learn what you need to do.
For that specifically, did you take any techniques you would normally apply to fiction writing and incorporate them into nonfiction writing?
Yeah, I mean, you're always thinking, and it was helpful studying kind of fiction writing for a while, because it just makes you think that much more, kind of clearly about narrative arc and how to hold a reader's attention. And, when you withhold information for this sort of dramatic reveal. But with this book in particular, a style of writing that I really wanted to do, or a type of writing that I really wanted to do, was bringing people to life on the page, like real, human beings. And that's just something that in my newspaper journalism, you just don't have, the space to do that in, a 1,500 word news article. So that was a form of writing that I was really excited to explore. And also it just felt really relevant for the topic. So many people's lives are so deeply affected by tourism. And I wanted to evoke those people, or some of those people, in a way that was really, I hope, compelling.
Yeah, it was. That's no small trick to pull off. In that way, you're sort of bringing a character to life, except they're not a fictional character, they're a real person. So then you have to find the balance of representing who they are without sort of going overboard in one way, and you can't get into somebody's mind. So that's tricky, because some of these people might read this too. So I'm sure, was that something you were thinking about as you were kind of writing about these people?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and they're all going to read it. I mean, I'm going to send them all copies of the book, and I'm still in touch with almost everybody, because, my tour guide in Riyadh, Fatima, we still text. I mean, we've become friends over this process. And so, I think for me, my real kind of true north in writing about people and bringing them to life on the page was it needs to feel like an accurate representation, like a really honest representation of what that interaction was actually like. And so that was just, and of course it's their story, but it's me telling their story. And so I was just trying to stay as honest as possible to the actual, moments that we spent together, and then just let the story kind of flow naturally from there.
Yeah, this is what it was really cool because you used your journalistic talent, your insane talent, I'll say. Sorry, you won't say it, I'll say it, to kind of seem like to detach from sort of just report in a way, but also you have this element of travelogue and, personal opinion. And it's a lot to weave together. And I just wanted to start as we get into the conversation of tourism with a quote from the book, because I think it's a good place to start and kind of give people an idea of where they're going to end up, hopefully, at the end of this conversation. In the book, you say, quote, "I know many of you are ready to join me in striving for a new and better way of doing things." And it goes on to say, "To be a tourist is a privilege, and for many of us, it's one of life's greatest pleasures." All the listeners know that, right? We love travel here. And you say, "With the right approach, which begins with a deep understanding of what's at stake, tourism can also be a powerful force for good." And I think that is a huge part of what we're going to talk about today. It's like the what's at stake part, right? So maybe by the end of this conversation, people listening will hopefully understand what it means to be a new tourist. I'm using air quotes. We can talk about that and how that approach can, make you feel good as a traveler, can help you have deeper travel experiences while benefiting the world. And there's a lot to unpack. So does that sound like kind of a fair way to set this up?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for starting. I think, you just quoted from the very end of the introduction. And that's where I really just tried to whet people's appetites and set up my motivation for writing this book. And it's really like, I live in a huge glass house. I'm not somebody to throw stones. I'm figuring this out as I go. And I really wanted to invite the reader to kind of come along with me as I do my best to figure this out. So let's go, let's have a fun adventure together. Let's meet some cool people together. Let's learn together. You watch me make some mistakes and learn from them. And in doing this together, let me inspire you to go out and do the same thing in your own life.
Yeah. And speaking of mistakes, I'll get you off the hook here because I feel like when people interview authors, they just pull things from the book and expect them to remember every single thing they wrote. And it's just, even though you wrote this book, it's not always possible. So we can, maybe you do. Maybe you have a photographic memory. I don't know. I'm trying to get you off the hook a little bit here.
Well, thanks, Jason. Well, I was just, I was in New York in April to record the audiobook narration, which was just so much fun. And oh my God, I was pinching myself there in the Simon & Schuster building on 6th Avenue in Manhattan, wow, who let me in here? So I just reread the manuscript, with a really focused rereading of it not that long ago. So I do feel like I have it pretty fresh in my mind.
Yeah, cool. You mentioned places you went and taking people along. If you just want to give people an overview of what are some of the places that you visited, as they'll come up in conversation, people will hear.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, maybe I'll start from the end and work backwards. So Hawaii, I spent about a month in Hawaii in the summer of 2022, which was fascinating. My sister has lived there for more than 20 years now, so it was a place I knew I wanted to write about. I went to Saudi Arabia. I went to Amsterdam. I went to Disneyland Paris. I went to Liverpool. I went to Iceland. I went to Chamonix in the French Alps, which is just sort of in the backyard of where I lived for 5 years. And I went to Cambodia. I think I hit all the spots there. Yeah.
Sounds like an incredible trip, by the way, on its own. All right. So I thought it would be good to start with kind of the evolution of tourism and travel because, and maybe this is partial history, because I think travel, like everything else, evolves and tourism evolves. And it's in some ways, taking from what you wrote in the book, it's a relatively newish concept, the idea of tourism. And maybe a good place to start is just to define tourism, what you mean by it.
As a word nerd, I'm somebody who loves digging into etymology, right? And so to go back to the origins of the word tourism itself, this comes from the Grand Tour, right? Which is what wealthy young men from, Western European nations would do in the sort of 17th and 18th centuries to travel, do a sort of a months-long journey, a months-long grand tour of Europe to, learn about everything that they would need to know to be prepared for life in the highest echelons of society as an adult. So it started off as like super privileged, like, not even the wealthy, but like the uber wealthy people who would do it. And I think the word tourist first appeared, if I'm remembering correctly, around 1811. It's either tourist or tourism first appeared around then. So it's kind of really early 19th century. And then over the course of the 19th century, you start to see tourism become more democratized. And, the steamship and, railroads and all of these things are making it easier for not everyone, but like not, the upper middle class to travel. And then you see people like Thomas Cook in England starting the first kind of real group tours in the mid 19th century. And from there, but it was really not, it was only in the 1960s and 70s. So like a century after we saw the first kind of group tours, did anyone start talking about tourism as an industry? And that's something that I really wanted to, help readers understand, is that, people have been traveling for all sorts of reasons for a couple hundred years, a few hundred years now. And only pretty recently have we started to think of this primarily through the lens of consumerism, which seems like a pretty important kind of mindset shift.
Yeah, as an industry, like you said, it's huge, but I feel like it kind of, I mean, if you're going back to the early 19th century at the start, it's like it kind of could sneak up on cities, maybe, in a way. And then we all know, when nobody likes to bring up the pandemic during these interviews, but like obviously that accelerated the remote work movement, which adds, and I want to ask you about that later, just kind of that element of it, which is people staying for a lot longer and, being able to work from anywhere. And obviously that's a big shift. There's a duality in tourism, right? I mean, you have in the title the power and perils of travel. And there's a quote I can read from the intro, which kind of exemplifies this. Say, tourism, quote, intensifies the commodification of culture, even as it sometimes helps to sustain them. Tourism provides a powerful economic incentive to protect humanity's most awe-inspiring pieces of cultural heritage, and it can also threaten their very existence. And you have a few examples like that. And so it's like this sort of back and forth struggle. And it's really interesting that we're talking today, because this morning I picked up the newspaper. We get the newspaper here in Norway. And wouldn't you know, Paige, there was an article. I saw a bunch of protesters. I'm like, what's this? It was people from the Canary Islands protesting against tourism. And it was all about what we're going to talk about today. And this was a good example of that. Like on the one hand, it brings money to a place, a destination. On the other, they were saying in the article, like these people are having to move away from the beach and like into these, sand hills or whatever, and then having to commute to take care of these tourists. And that's not very good for the local population. So it's complicated. If it's a Facebook relationship, it's complicated. Right?
Oh my God. Just flash back to 2007 there, Jason. Wow. Yeah.
It's so Paige. I'm old school.
Oh, there you go. But so complicated, which is why I felt like this topic is such like my perfect subject matter for a book that can really go deep. And yes, I mean, tourism is just this enormous force, and like any force, like it can be used for good or for evil, right? We need and it's all in the how. It's all in the how. It's all in the details. So yeah, I mean, I think so. And in the book, I really wanted to include examples of where things are really not working well, and examples of where it is working well. I wanted to have the whole spectrum, and I wanted to show people that I'm someone who loves to travel and who is concerned about this, and who is doing my best to learn about these things, so that I, as a kind of person aspiring to be a new tourist, can do my very best to maximize the positive impact of my visit on a place and minimize the negative impact. And maybe two examples. I remember two places that I forgot to list earlier that are very much in the book. but that kind of exemplify these two sort of ends of the spectrum. And one is Barcelona, where I spent some time with a fantastic architect and urban planner who took me around her home city, and Kerala in South India, which I was so lucky to have the chance to visit, and where tourism is really being used in a way that's absolutely supporting the local communities, in really profound and important ways. So, with tourism, you get this whole, it's the whole big mess, right? So I'm just trying to help people start to sift through that and understand where they fit in the system.
And the system is, it seems like one of the big conclusions is that a lot of it comes to the government and how the government manages it. I guess maybe that's more through the lens of how it impacts the local population.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I get annoyed when I see news articles that either implicitly or explicitly blame tourists for kind of problems of over tourism or tourist crowding at places. I mean, not to say that that we tourists don't have some agency. We have a lot of agency and we have responsibility, but in so many cases, in so many places that are struggling with high tourist numbers, it was the local governments that spent years, if not decades, and huge amounts of money doing their very best to bring as many tourists as possible, right? And that didn't, and Barcelona is one of these places. Amsterdam, in its own way, is another one of these places. The government bet big on tourism and didn't at the same time create the infrastructure, the regulations that were necessary to make sure that that thing that they were asking for didn't end up causing problems for their residents. So yeah, I think that's, governments have a role, and that's something that I don't think gets as much attention as it should in the media these days.
We'll get back to the interview in just a moment. I know you love earning travel rewards and cash back, and that's why you're going to love Rakuten. With Rakuten, you can earn cash back on everything you need to book your dream trip, hotels, flights, rental cars, experiences, and more, while still booking through your favorite travel sites. And don't worry, cash back can be earned on top of earning the credit card points and the hotel and airline loyalty points that matter most to you, depending on how you make your booking. Plus, with Rakuten, you can also earn cash back on groceries and other purchases like electronics, pet supplies, and more. And the best part, you can join today for free and start earning cash back on top of your travel rewards. Go to Rakuten.com or get the app. That's Rakuten, Rakuten. Rakuten, the most rewarding way to shop.
There's no one like you, and there never will be.
From the producer Bohemian Rhapsody, there are many legends, but there is only one. Michael, rated PG-13, in theaters April 24.
Now, back to the show. I think a good example of, just looking at a bit of the history, the guidebooks. That's a real concrete example of how travel went from one thing to another. You called it the Lonely Planet effect, I think, in the book. Because, and I know in the book you wrote, they sold 120 million guidebooks in the first 4 decades, and you got to talk to Tony Wheeler, the founder, and I think people see guidebooks now, and that's like it's hard to relate in a way to thinking about a traveler in the 19th century. But if you can think about a traveler in the 1980s that had guidebooks, and these guidebooks, I don't think people understand how much power they had, where they could, make one recommendation, and the next thing you know, there was thousands of people descending upon this place. And when we could talk about versions of that, I want to unpack versions of that today. But, I encourage people to get this book because there's so much interesting stuff in here. One of the things that I found fascinating on this topic was that Fodors or Fodders, I'm always not sure which one.
I always forget.
Their guidebook authors were CIA agents.
Yes!
Some of them. That's insane.
That was I came across that and I was like, okay, this is not immediately relevant to my narrative, which is more about the Lonely Planet effect. But I was like, I can't not put this in there. It's so cool. But they were, this guidebook outfit was very explicitly and for many years supported by the CIA, because they wanted to have, their young CIA analysts scooting around Eastern Europe collecting as much information as possible under the guise of being guidebook writers.
Yeah. I mean, what a great cover. You can think about like just staying in the hostel, like the sort of hippie backpacker. I'm just a guidebook writer, man.
I know.
I'm trying to live on $20 a day. Meanwhile, that's crazy.
Yeah.
We got to get one of them on the show. I want to get
I mean, how you track down one of these guys?
CIA agent, guidebook writer.
From it'd be like from the 60s or 70s. Yeah.
Well, for our younger listeners, I can't emphasize enough the impact of like these guidebooks and Lonely Planet specifically. On that topic, did you because you talked to Tony Wheeler, was that an in-person thing? Did you meet him in person? And
no, I was so thrilled to have the chance. I interviewed him twice, actually, and he was in Australia both times, so it was over Zoom or whatever. And that was great. And he was super cooperative. And I sent him a copy, actually, of the manuscript. Like, he gave me a blurb, right? And I sent him a copy of the manuscript before it was finalized. And my book editor, between you and me and our listeners, was a little bit nervous. He's like, "Are you sure you wouldn't do that? Like, what if he has issues with what you wrote?" And I was like, "No, I feel like it was honest and fair. And if there's something that feels unfair to him, like I want to know about it while I can still change it." And so I sent it to him, and he read it, and he had some kind of points of discussion that he wanted to sort of get into with me. But he didn't have any quibbles with the text at all. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it obviously. He worked hard and he created something out of passion and, mad respect. I'm just wondering now in hindsight, did you get the sense that he thought it was a good thing in the end for the world what was the sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think in a way, and one thing that he said when he responded after having read the manuscript, he was like, "Thank you for including the other people in this story as well." So I tell the story of Lonely Planet, but I also talk about Bill Dalton of Moon Publications and Hillary and George Bratt, and later just Hillary Bratt of the Bratt Guides. I talk about Rick Steves. I talk about Mark Ellingham, who wrote the Rough Guides. I mean, I needed, just from thinking about it from a narrative perspective, I needed one story to tell. So, and Lonely Planet is obviously the biggest one, so they were my focus. But I mean, because he was Tony and Maureen Wheeler. They did this amazing thing and they were really good at it. But honestly, if they hadn't done it, somebody else would have done it. Like somebody else would have stepped in. It was really this particular moment in history and the way that the world was changing and the way that these young baby boomers were just dying to get out and see the world. And, barriers were coming down between countries and, somebody was going to do it if Tony and Maureen didn't. And they just happened to be the ones who did it the most successfully, which is why we're, still talking about them. But I love your point about, stressing to kind of younger listeners, just how out of the box, these guidebooks were back then. I mean, Mark Ellingham, the founder of the Rough Guides, told me that going to Greece in the 1980s and writing and other sort of countries in Eastern Europe and writing guidebooks in the 1980s, he's like, it felt like doing frontline journalism. There was nobody writing about this stuff. He and his buddies who he hired to help him were the first ones to put this, into words and to sell it to an audience for them, in the UK. And it was really shaping the movement of so many people at a moment when it was almost impossible to find information, specific usable information about these kind of lesser visited corners of the world, and whereas now we just take it completely for granted. We all have Google Maps and, TripAdvisor or whatever. It's, it's all, it's way, there's way too much, but,
Well, the problems that we're talking about and we're unpacking here, they don't really start until people go to a place. And historically, if we're looking back at history and the evolution of tourism, I mean, sometimes it's easy to think of tourism as this blanket thing that's not evolving as quickly as we think it is because it's just easy to see things static. I mean, we know this is what this interview gives us is opportunity to kind of take a meta look at this stuff. But the problems don't really start until people actually show up. And so the guidebooks are the things that brought people there. And the guidebook writers and companies, they were in service of the reader, the traveler, having discovering a place having an authentic experience, and in fairness, like trying to help them get under the skin of it, right? Like giving some historical context. Like I always enjoyed guidebooks for if they're like a tool, right? If you go to every single place and you only go to the places in the guidebook, you're going to be with like other travelers all the time. If you used it back then as a tool to kind of discover new places, maybe learn a bit more about the culture, get some safety tips, kind of, you could use them in different ways, right? So we can't just like put like a blame on all of them.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they're really, I loved the conversation that I had on this topic with Thomas Koenstem, who was a Lonely Planet writer for a long time and who wrote the book, Do Travel Writers Go to Hell? His memoir. If you haven't read that, it's a fun read. It's very kind of early 2000s at this point. But he wrote this memoir about how, his time as a Lonely Planet writer, focusing on his time in Brazil. And, and he got huge, and I write in this section of the book, how he got huge pushback from what he wrote, and, which was kind of a traumatic experience for him. But like Thomas had some really interesting thoughts on what guidebooks represent and what he saw as like a guidebook writer in many countries over many years. And, one thing that he really stressed to me was that he often found that the places like the hotels or the restaurants or what have you, that were most likely to end up in the guidebook were the ones who kind of knew how to play to the guidebook writers. And they were often owned by Americans or Europeans. They were owned by Westerners who were living. He worked a lot in Latin America. So that he found that actually it wasn't the really locally owned places that were kind of savvy enough to know how to get themselves in the guidebook. And so he has some really interesting thoughts on the guidebook and the evolution of the guidebook, and this kind of notion of that, what he calls the parachute artist, somebody who parachutes into a place and collects some information and gets the heck out of there, but leaves this enormous kind of influence in their wake.
Yeah.
So it's complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. That's interesting. That you can imagine that had a compounding effect. Maybe early on it was just finding these places, and then as the restaurants and businesses and tour companies or whatever got savvy with getting in, those listings kind of kept building. Bringing that to the modern day, how do people decide where to go now and what creates over tourism? Now you're looking at, I pulled three things from the book, basically. You got social media, you've got the pop culture stuff, like the story from Iceland's great. I didn't expect are you a believer, by the way? A Justin Bieber?
I'm not, but I have to say my daughters are.
Okay.
They're like, especially my 8-year-old is really into kind of like, 16-year-old Justin Bieber, which is like, oh my God. When I show her pictures of what he looks like now, she's like, ew.
Yeah. But I bring him up because you were walking in the footsteps of the Biebs in Iceland. And, we can talk about that story in a minute, but that was like an version of how pop culture can influence where people go. And then destination marketing, which like they just kind of took over the roles of the guidebooks. We're like, we're going to just brand our own country and tell you where to go. And that's, as you unpack in the book, that's not always a fair representation of the people who inhabit the place itself. And Hawaii was the big example that kind of stood out with some of the contentious sort of attitudes and ways that the country was marketing and kind of how they were. Yeah. You're here to unpack this, not me, but I just wanted to hear your thoughts on, let's start with the social media stuff, because I thought it was really interesting on, well, I have to flip to the page now because I have it in my notes here. You talked about Sean Smith, who's an academic who's kind of studying some of these Instagram sort of part of his studies, I guess, where they perpetuate these colonial stereotypes via Instagram posts. I found that really interesting. Can you talk about that? Because I think like that might kind of make people see things a little different when they're scrolling through their gram or whatever, social media, TikTok, exactly, or whatever. Yeah.
The first thing that struck me, and this isn't Sean's research specifically, but the first thing that struck me in doing, the research that I did this is chapter 2 of the book, where I really get into social media, is just how much all of us are influenced by what we see on our own Instagram feed. I think I like to think of myself as somebody who's like, oh, I might see a pretty picture. That's not necessarily going to like affect my next vacation destination decision. But actually, if you look at surveys about this, we are really affected, and not only by travel, quote unquote, like influencers, but really by our peers and our family members and our friends. So the first, one of the points I wanted to make is actually, even if you're somebody who has a couple hundred Instagram followers, like you have an audience that you're influencing when you post something. So this, we should all kind of be thoughtful with how we post. Sean Smith really looks at how there are these kind of tropes that have evolved, and how social media kind of has turned us into how social media has turned us into people who are going to a place and looking to consume something. Really, it's to come and sort of like pull something out of that place for our own benefit, for to get the nice shot for our own grid. And how this, so he makes a lot of links between kind of social media and older forms of travel writing, where there are really kind of colonial tropes. And so he just says, this is something, he just points this out. And then, so I kind of describe that and say like, okay, these are things that I recognize that I've done myself in posting on social media about my travels. Like, let me just be a little bit more aware of how I'm posting about places when I travel. And let me try to make sure that I don't put myself and my own experience like at the center of what I'm posting, or that I try to kind of add some value, add a little bit of depth. It's not just really, a fun, pretty sort of reel or, post or whatever that I'm sharing. It's something that will help anyone who follows me have a deeper understanding of the place that I was lucky enough to be able to visit.
Yeah, that's interesting. So couple things to pull out, just basically saying that don't look at people that have 100,000 followers as the only influencers, because everybody's an influencer, even if they're just influencing their friends and family. The word influencer is so annoying anyway. I know it gets a bad rap, but I know those, a lot of those people work hard and they earn a living traveling and they love what they do. And I've had them on the show, and it's again, this is where it gets complicated, because they're providing a service for a destination that often hires them and wants to show off some of the beauty that they have.
Totally.
And there's different, like what you're saying, there's different ways to do it.
Yeah. Like I interviewed Gabby Beckford, who is like, she's at Pax Light is her like handle. And I was so impressed with her. And I met her when I was in New York in April. I met her for coffee, and I gave her a copy of the book, and we had a really good chat. And she is, quote unquote, travel influencer. And she is so thoughtful, and she is so aware of her impact, and she takes that so seriously. And she's really coming at this like a job, and, and some like she's a real professional with it. And she's really trying to be aware of her impact and make it as positive as possible in so many different ways. So I was really, there are a lot of different ways to do it. And so I pulled out two different influencers who I interviewed. It would have been easy enough to pick out an influencer who's doing it sort of quote like badly, but I just used myself as the bad example.
I noticed that, which was,
because it's like, because I want to encourage people to do that themselves. And if I pulled out some travel influencer who's doing like egregious stuff, I don't know, and wag my finger at them and say, ick, then that's not going to encourage people to turn the lens on themselves, right? Which is what we all need to do. And so I'm like, okay, let me examine something that I made and posted on Instagram, which is still on Instagram, that I'm not super proud of, but like, fine. Like, let me show people that I can have second thoughts about that. And I can, and in so doing, maybe I'll inspire you to do the same. And then I picked two influencers who I thought were doing really interesting and important work, and then featured them in the chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, that was good. That was good thinking. Just like using yourself as the example. It's like,
come on. Like, like I said, I'm not perfect.
No, none of us are. I think we've all been guilty of going to a place and taking from it rather than like that. The way you said that is kind of, I think, one of the things that hit home in part of this book too. It's like this, if you're thinking about travel as a consumerist mindset, that is the sort of the gobbling up of maybe culture, or trying to get, draw from it rather than somehow, I don't know. It's tough because you can't just show up in a place for like a week, and it's hard to figure out a way as just a traveler is kind of trying to enjoy some time, maybe soak up some culture to figure out a way to like give back to that local community. But maybe giving back, I don't know, you tell me. I mean, I think oftentimes traditionally we think about giving back as, well, you're volunteering at an orphanage or something, which is another thing that you put in the book. Like that was a whole other story I think you included about those orphanages, like volunteerism type of opportunities that were really just not good for the community in many ways. For the traveler that's going on a 10-day holiday or something, I mean, it's about representing, like you said, in social media. What about on the ground? What are some of the things that you would
Yeah.
suggest?
I mean, I think honestly, and this is very much me speaking from my own personal experience, some of which I recount in the book. I think the single most important and most beneficial, and honestly, like incredibly powerful thing that each of us can do when we travel is to really aim and do our best to make connections with people who live in that place, like have a really authentic human connection sort of experience with somebody who lives there. And so for me, one like really practical way that I've done that over the years, as I describe in the book, is hire a local tour guide. Like find somebody who is from that place. You're paying them, right? So you're putting some money straight into the pocket of a local, and you're spending several hours together, probably possibly a whole day or several days, and you really have the chance to get to know this person and to share your story with them and to have them share their story with you. And like that is what is actually going to leave an impression on you. That's what's going to open your mind. That's what's going to change your perspective on your home country and, the politics or whatever's going on, when you go back home, much more so than going to the museum or, seeing that top tourist attraction or eating at that Michelin-starred restaurant. What you're going to remember is your human interaction. So I think as people who are trying to do tourism, trying to do travel in a better way, I think keeping that human focus is really important. And, and to do that, it requires a certain level of modesty, of like just being humble. And it requires that you put yourself kind of out there a little bit, like you get out of your comfort zone. You're going to have a conversation with somebody who's from a completely different culture than yours, and who might have views that challenge you. Like, I described being in Riyadh and hanging out with this Saudi woman, Fatima, who took me around for a full day, and we got into it. We had discussions about her country's leaders and her country's stance on, human rights and homosexuals and women's rights, and we didn't always see eye to eye, right? And we ended that day really good friends, and I'm still in touch with her. And so it's just like, I think coming at it with that human perspective is something that will give you a huge gift and will hopefully leave a good impression, leave a good sort of impact on the place you're visiting as well.
We'll get back to the interview in just a moment.
This episode is brought to you by Fandango. People say fans are too distracted these days, but the truth is, when a great movie hits the screen, you show up, you stay glued, invested, part of the story. And without fans like you, there'd be no cinema magic, no shared moments. So head to Fandango.com to get tickets, stream, or rent or buy top movies and series. Fandango loves fans.
Refreshing wild cherry cola meets smooth cream. The treat you deserve. Pepsi Wild Cherry and Cream. Treat yourself.
Now, back to the show. Yeah, that was a fascinating part of the book, was your sort of the lead up to your trip to Saudi Arabia, and you talked about sort of the feelings you had and how everything sort of played out on the ground.
Oh, I was so scared.
Yeah.
I was so scared.
Because
it was good. Well, because, I'm a woman. I was a woman traveling solo in Saudi Arabia. I was a journalist. And, but I was like, okay, I'm going to go just as a tourist. I'm not going to request any official interviews. I'm literally just going to go to experience this country as a tourist would. And so that's what I did. But, yeah, it was that trip was so unexpected. I was very much kind of under the radar, just doing my own thing. But I had a fantastic and very eye-opening experience. I have to say, the week that I spent there didn't change my opinion on the country's politics, but it helped me understand the country in a much more nuanced way. And I'll give an example that I share in the book. Like when the day that I was hanging out with Fatima, like she was driving me around in her pickup truck, and at one point the battery died, and we were in this kind of busy area with in the parking lot, and this young Saudi guy just like jogs over, and he's like first speaking in Arabic, then he switches to English when he realizes I'm American, and he's like, oh, he wants to help us, right? And then he gives us a jump, and then it's like, okay, thanks, like nice meeting you. And he was like, wait, like he wanted to talk to me, he wanted to ask me about America, and this young guy, like 23, 24, and he told me, he was like, do you know, like after I finished my architecture exams, like my friend and I went to Orlando and New York, and we had a fantastic time. And I was like, oh, that's so cool, right? And he was like, you wouldn't believe it. Like, he's like, I couldn't believe it. I felt so safe the entire time. It's nothing like what you see on the news or in social media. And I was just like, oh my God. Like he was just like so eager to share this with me that like, American woman, didn't you know that the United States is not like what you read about in the news? And I was like, yes, that has been my experience as well.
Right. That's the look in the mirror moment, right? You forget that other countries see America,
and he was so genuine,
way,
and he was so excited to talk to this American woman. And so I'm like, that's what the world needs, right? Like, that's what the world needs more of.
Well, what do you think destinations can do better to market themselves, or should they not even market themselves? So where do you think all that's going? And I mean, for people that aren't in the industry, and maybe some people listening are surprised right now. Like, what do you mean? Like, countries, they have a budget to market themselves, to bring visitors because of the positive economic impact, but that can often mean other things too. And if it's not managed right, or maybe not even represented right, they're not going to do a good job of one thing. It's like a sort of obvious thing is maybe they could do a better job dispersing tourists around the country as opposed to consolidating them into these sort of hot spots that are marketed in a certain way, or experiences like you mentioned, the sort of some of the stuff in Hawaii, like going to the luau and sort of the typical. By the way, nice Brady Bunch reference. I remember, everybody remembers the Brady Bunch Hawaii episode. If you are of a certain age, if you're not, you should just like probably on YouTube or something, because
it's on
hilarious
YouTube.
Episode.
It's on YouTube. I found it on YouTube.
I totally forgot about that until you referenced it, and I was like, wow,
I don't even remember how I came across that, because I watched the Brady Bunch a little bit as a kid, but like I didn't remember the Hawaii episodes. So I think I was just Googling it. I wanted to know the history of this hotel where the conference, I went to this like Native Hawaiian conference when I was in Honolulu, and it was in the Sheraton Waikiki, and I was like, let me find out about like how, the history of the Sheraton Waikiki. And I think it was just in Googling about the history that I was like, oh my God, the Brady Bunch Hawaiian Vacation was like filmed at this hotel in 1972
they got cursed.
Or whatever.
Didn't they get cursed? Right, I think they got cursed.
Yeah, because I forget the whole saga.
Anyway,
but there was some drama.
Here nor there.
There was some drama. I lost my train of thought. Where were we?
Well, we're talking about destinations and how they market themselves. Yeah, so I'm just wondering, what are some principles that you think, just from your research and from the interactions and the experiences you had in Hawaii and other places, what are some of the things you think people are doing right, doing wrong, not doing that they should be?
Yeah, I mean, I think in principle, destinations need to focus on making sure that the tourism benefits everyone in the local community, not just the people who work in tourism. And honestly, like the most efficient and kind of effective way to do that is through a tourist tax that you then use to find, like Amsterdam is an example of this, and where they've just increased their tourist tax. They've just, imposed a big increase in their tourist tax at the beginning of this year. They use that tourist tax to fund like kind of community green space in the kind of outer areas of Amsterdam, like the kind of maybe poorer parts of the city that tourists are never going to visit. Whereas I think in a lot of places, especially in the United States, like the tourist tax, which usually comes in the form of a hotel tax, that money is used for destination marketing. So it's like, okay, we tax the tourists when they come, and then we take that money and we use it to bring more tourists. People. But honestly, like it depends, if that's sustainable, and if tourism isn't, kind of growing really out of control, and if you're kind of having a limited marketing budget, then, maybe that balance is working. And, but I think, there's a risk that that it's going to sort of get out of control, especially with tourism growing globally as fast as it is. So I think, having governments that are super attuned to local needs and that really have front and center in their minds, how do we put in place the regulations to make sure that this isn't going to, make our residents' quality of life go down? So that might mean putting restrictions on where hotels can be built, or how many hotels, or what kind of like shops, what's the mix of retail shops in the city center, that kind of thing. That's all like local planning regulations. So really keeping the residents at the forefront of their minds is what governments need to do.
Yeah, kind of residents first sort of lens. And I hope that, I'm sure it's happening, these conversations taking place where, just like in travel, you can take the best of a place home with you in some way, whether it's spirit, whether it's your attitude, whether it's the stories that you share. And I feel like destinations should be learning from each other, right? Like if something's working in a local community somewhere else and it's a certain tax model or whatever, like shouldn't they be, hopefully they're sharing that information. I'm sure there's conferences and things, but
well, honestly, that was one of the main reasons. Well, not one of the main reasons. Like that was a motivator for me writing this book, because as I went to these places, I kept being like, "Oh my God, like you
guys should do this.
You guys should talk to each other.
Yeah.
Like, please."
How are they not talking to each other?
Because I was in Hawaii the summer of 2022, and then like August, September of 2022, so like a month, like I think 3 weeks even. Oh my God, my carbon footprint. After I got back from Hawaii, I was in Kerala in South India, which is this really fantastic example of where the government is just like so deeply kind of responsive to local needs with tourism. And I wanted to I spent a lot of time in Hawaii with John DeFries, who's the head of the Hawaii Tourism Authority, who's a native Hawaiian guy who is doing amazing things and really fighting the good fight for tourism in Hawaii. Like I wanted to bring him to Kerala to talk to the people in Kerala who have really transformed how tourism is working there, to get them to talk to each other. Because I don't think in a lot of cases, it's easy for places to just be in their own little silos and not to look more broadly, especially outside of their countries. But I hope my book might be able to contribute to that in its own small way, because so many of the challenges are so similar in so many of these places that they have a lot to learn from each other.
Yeah, it's interesting. Living in Oslo, I was just downtown earlier this week, and the cruise ships roll in, and they get a little taste of this, that, and the other. But it's complicated.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's like, so I would, if I were an Oslo resident, I would be thinking like, okay, how much tax are they paying and what's happening to that tax? Like, what are those visitors doing? Like when they cruise, the cruise ship passengers, are they coming in just for a day? How are they contributing to the local economy? How is the government making sure that this is, on balance, contributing to life in Oslo and not detracting from it? And if you put the right regulations and kind of infrastructure and rules in place, then it can, it's possible for it to work well, right? But if it's a free for all, then like by definition, it's, your residents' quality of life is going to suffer for sure.
Yeah. I mean, on that note, you have in the book, you talk about the Butler's tourism life cycle model created by this Scottish guy. It's a really interesting model, and I'll give you the short version, but basically I'll quote from your book. The idea is that tourist destinations follow a typical cycle over time. And first you have like the exploration phase, then the involvement phase where the visitors numbers rise. Then you have eventually the developmental stage where businesses are spending a significant amount of time and money to advertise the place. And then eventually there's the consolidation stage, then the stagnation stage. That's what I'm getting to, where it says, quote, you will have a well-established image, but it will no longer be in fashion in terms of traveling there. And so my question with this is, do you think it's guaranteed that the quality of life for locals will suffer the more popular a place is? Like if this is the model, like it's a framework. Like nobody's saying it's the end all be all, but it does make a lot of sense. And I mean, if it's inevitable that eventually you'll end up at this final stage where, everybody that lives there is suffering, is it, I don't know. Is it
Yeah,
even worth
I think it's a helpful. Well, thank you for for mentioning this moment in my most kind of policy wonky moment in the book, where I'm like, oh yeah, let me talk about this, kind of tourism like paradigm. I think it's a really helpful construct, and it's definitely not sort of the way things have to be. I think it was like when he wrote that in the 80s, it was really kind of looking back and describing the patterns that had already been happening. But that doesn't necessarily mean that is what we have to be, stuck in the future. And I think there are some examples, I wanted to include in the book examples of places that I saw on different kind of moments in that life cycle and different sort of turning points. But no, I think it's really within the government's control to determine whether a place goes into stagnation and, residents' quality of life begins to suffer. I think it's really something that, that we have a lot of agency over, and it is not at all inevitable.
Can we get the McClanahan tourism life cycle model, like an upgraded version? I mean, you would be the one to make this, because you've gone so deep. So maybe, just throwing it out there.
I'll do a little kind of thinking on that one, Jason. Yeah.
Time to update this model. I am going to ask you sort of ultimately like what it means to be a new tourist, like kind of taking all this knowledge you've shared today and kind of putting it together in a call to action. I want to talk about tourist traps first, because you have a whole chapter called Tourist Traps.
Oh, I love that chapter.
It's fascinating because like in the book you say tourist traps respond to a basic human need, our desire to escape from reality. And you use theme parks as sort of the quintessential example of that. Later, you say, the deeper problem with tourist traps, perhaps the only significant problem with tourist traps, arises when the fantastical, rule-bending world they represent begins to trespass on everyday life. Yeah, maybe you could explain that. I don't know if you meant for the individual or talk about tourist traps, because this is just like a term that people throw out. Oh, that's a tourist trap. But you have like a whole chapter on this. And
I wanted to dig in again.
This is fascinating.
Again, as a word nerd, the word nerd right here, I wanted to dig into like, okay, where did this term come from, and how did it evolve, and how has it come to represent, what does it represent today, and how has it come to represent that? Tourist trap definitions now are kind of like overpriced, overcrowded, with an overtone of kind of tourist exploitation. Things have been dumbed down, but also someplace that is completely sort of separate from reality. It's just like a little kind of fantasy zone. And so it's like, okay, but like, nobody would say like, oh, on my next vacation, guess what? I'm going to go to a tourist trap, right? But like, how many of us do it? Like almost all of us, right? Who hasn't been to a tourist trap? Maybe we don't go to the tourist trap that's like down the street from us, or that's like the next town over. But when we, fly to another continent, there's a good chance we're going to end up in one, And so what is the appeal of these places, and like why, like what is it that makes them so attractive? And I kind of wanted to dig into that in this chapter, and really in a way of like, no shame, like let's just look at this honestly. And clearly these places are providing something important to our psyches. So like, let's try to understand what that is, and look at it without shaming, or without putting anybody down for their interests or their likes. So I wrote about, Disneyland Paris, which I find it to be a fascinating place. I'm not a big kind of theme park person in general, but I was just so intrigued by the time that I spent there. And I just quote a couple of people in the chapter, but I interviewed so many other people who were in Disneyland Paris, or who, are like president of the Disneyland Paris like club, or like Disneyland Paris, and really got a sense of what these places offer people. And it's, this escape from reality, this escape from the everyday, which is like, who am I, or who are we to put anybody down for needing an escape from their everyday reality? And in a sense, I think, like I said, the last bit that you quoted there, I think Disneyland Paris is amazing because it provides this fantasy world in a way that's not kind of imposing itself on anyone's everyday life, Whereas the other example of a tourist trap I describe in the same chapter is Amsterdam's red light district, which is both a huge tourist destination, many call it a tourist trap destination, and it's home to, I think, something like 5,000 permanent residents. So, these are people who wake up and find vomit on their doorstep on a regular basis, and who have to deal with the crowds and the kind of crazy partying that happens right in their backyard. So this is like, when we have the fantasy world butting up against the everyday life, this is where we have problems that we need to manage. But that doesn't necessarily mean that tourist traps in and of themselves are, a negative thing. It's all in the how.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I enjoy a good roadside attraction, like a solid American, like the Corn Palace in Mitchell, South Dakota, for example, or some place like that where you're just like, there's billboards for it like 200 miles away. It's just like south of the border comes to mind.
South of the border.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I grew up, I'm from North Carolina, and I grew up every summer we would drive to South Carolina, and like literally I would be so excited as 8-year-old Paige to count.
Yeah.
My sister and I would count the billboards on I-95
Yep.
going down. And it was just like, this is like the highlight of the trip was like how many billboards we each counted on either side of the car.
Because the marketing was genius, because they would just run these billboards for hundreds of miles before south of the border, which is on the border of South Carolina and North Carolina.
North Carolina, yeah.
And it's just a tourist trap, essentially, right?
Completely.
I mean, you could call it that. There's just stores, and I don't even remember what's there. I don't know what's there now.
My parents never stopped, and my sister and I never,
No.
my dad was always like, no, gotta make good time or else,
No, he avoided the tourist. I just remember my favorite billboard is still stuck with me. That's how powerful the marketing was. It just said, "Keep screaming, kids. They'll stop."
I remember that one.
I'm just like, does it get any better than that?
Oh man, I haven't thought about south of the border in decades,
Yeah.
Jason. Thank you for bringing it.
Well, I mean,
Facebook is complicated, and south of the border billboards is like flashback to the first half of my life.
I am here to serve. I think of places like that, and I mean, tying this back in what you're talking about, I think that's a great example of, it's sort of a mindset thing too, right? Like sometimes you just go into these places with we know this isn't real. We know this is a tourist trap, but we're just gonna come in and just like let go and relinquish ourselves to this experience of, and that's kind of freeing in a way, right? You're just like, I'm not trying to like seek out the most authentic taco at south of the border. I'm just like soaking up the south of the border tourist trap experience, and I'm going to enjoy and love every second of it because it's just its own unique thing in some way. I think about like another one that jumped to my head was Niagara Falls. And that's a really interesting one because you have this beautiful natural phenomenon, and then you have this horrible town with,
I've never been to Niagara Falls.
The Ripley's, believe it or not, wax museum, and all these sort of things like that.
Yeah.
And it's just like, how do I reconcile these two things? Like, how do these go together?
There you go.
But that's that's what it is.
And Amsterdam red light district, I mean, it's so fascinating because, there's this big debate there around tourism and sex tourism and whether like the sex workers should be, should be allowed to stay there in this historic center of Amsterdam or whether they should be moved out. And the mayor is really pushing still for like a kind of a sex hotel, which is like kind of an icky term, but to be built on the outskirts of the city and to move all the sex workers out of the red light district, because she really wants to clear out this type of like, let's come and escape reality tourism, right? Reduce the sort of, the cannabis smoking for non-Dutch residents and, the drinking in the street and get rid of the sex workers and kind of clean it up. At the same time, you have Amsterdam residents of whom, with whom I spent a lot of time, I spent a lot of time talking to many Amsterdam residents, red light district residents. None of them like this idea. They're all like, the sex workers are an essential part of our community. Just like, the tourists are part of our community too. We need to find a new balance and make sure that our community, gets along better within itself, with the tourists, with the sex workers, with the other people who work and live here. And we don't solve that problem by pushing them out. So essentially they were saying, actually, these residents were telling me, this kind of element of a fantasy world is very much kind of part of our DNA. It's sort of part of what we're about. And by kind of trying to strip us of this essential element of our identity, you're going to be doing more harm to residents than you are by leaving them, like leaving the sex workers there and continuing the current situation. So I find that this kind of balance between fantasy and reality a really interesting discussion, debate, a very active discussion, debate in the red light district in Amsterdam, which is why I wanted to go and spend time there. Yeah.
That was a great choice because you have a multi-layer escape from reality, right? Like you have the area itself, then you have sex, you have drugs, you have these other ways to escape within the place. It's and then you went to your first peep show, which you wrote about. We need to talk about that.
Indeed.
Indeed.
And it was so cool. Like that was such an eye-opening trip for me because I didn't sort of go into detail in the book, but the woman who recommended that I go to that peep show is a sex worker who I spent like 3 or 4 hours with, just like talking to her. And there's anybody who goes to Amsterdam, you should go check out the Prostitution Information Center, which is just behind the kind of the big old church in the red light district. And they're open. You could just walk in. They have, kind of information displays. They give talks and stuff. And it's run by, volunteer sex workers who are there to kind of inform visitors about their work and their place in the community. And it was there that I ended up spending a lot of time with 2 different sex workers, just hearing their stories and, understanding their lives. And, and I didn't want to kind of portray them as like, quote, characters, too much in the book, the way I did with other people I met and spent time with, because I didn't feel like the right approach really. So I kind of put myself in it more than I did them. But what I learned from those 2 women, one of whom, by the way, was like 59 years old and works in a window, right? And is a former nurse turned sex worker. Like I found that their stories were just fascinating, as a journalist, but also just as a human being and as a woman, just to spend time with these women was fascinating. I learned so much. Yeah.
That's a great example of something an individual traveler could do. Like that's a place
100%,
that you can go and talk
100%.
to these people instead of just walking around staring at the windows. You could go and have a conversation and really get a better understanding of the neighborhood. And I'm not saying like, sometimes this stuff can sound like, well, aren't we supposed to be having fun when we're that is fun, getting to learn and to converse and see where the day goes. I mean,
totally.
It doesn't have to be like you must educate yourself at all times,
Well, and I'll add, it was this, like one of these 2 sex workers who was the one who like really strongly encouraged me to go see this peep show. She was like, okay. And then she had like a list of even like she showed me, she was like, hey, Paige, come over here. It's like, take a picture of this list. She had a list of like all the different like sex clubs in Amsterdam. Go there, go to the Prostitution Information Center where you can go if you want to like do the sex.
And
she was like, here,
recommendations.
Yeah. And she was like, okay, this one is like, like this one is like this one's like that. And, I'm like, okay, maybe I'll just do the 2-minute peep show, but thank you for the information. But it's like, have a conversation about it, learn about it. And yeah, if you want to go to Amsterdam and sleep with a prostitute, like, I mean, heck, a lot of people do it. Like, but maybe before you do that, go to the Prostitution Information Center, have a chat with a sex worker and learn about it. And, these are, and learn how you're contributing to the local economy and, taxes will be paid on the money you spend. Like, I don't know, educate yourself and have that human to human connection, which is maybe harder to have in a booth. Sorry. But like have a conversation and educate yourself and and then make your own choice.
Human interaction, human connection is something that's come up a few times, of course. And I'm just wondering for the process of writing the book, I mean, this is a good example of, okay, there's the prostitution center, so you can walk in and you can talk to people there. But what about these serendipitous kind of people you meet along the way? How do you approach that just as an author? Do you just kind of, what do you do? Do you schedule a day where you're like, I'm just going to go out and hope I meet somebody today? I mean, I know you have some people that you schedule, like I would imagine, like, there's busy people in the, Hawaiian tourism board or wherever,
exactly.
And then you're going to sit down, you're going to schedule it. But what about, seems like there's a lot of serendipitous kind of interactions that you include in the book. I'm curious. It's like the gonzo journalism thing. Like, how do you
Yeah, the single most serendipitous one, which was really just fell in my lap, was when I was in Liverpool, and it was kind of end of the day, and I'd had I always line up interviews, except for when I went to Saudi Arabia, but I always line up a bunch of interviews with like the government people or like the head of the marketing board, tourism marketing board, or, these kind of people.
So you'll have something.
And I know. So I get my the ones that I know I want, the local activist, the local campaigner on tourism, whatever, you set all these up. And then you leave yourself time between them, right? And you don't overschedule yourself. And honestly, I think being a solo traveler like really sort of opens you up to the possibility of having these kinds of spontaneous interactions in a way that if you're traveling with a group or even in a couple, like it's harder to kind of just walk up to a person. But yeah, I was standing, I had finished my interviews for the day. It was kind of like early evening, and I was just kind of wandering around in Liverpool, this beautiful kind of open plaza area right on the waterfront. And I was just kind of gazing up at these buildings. I was like, wow, gosh, this is like really beautiful scene. And this man literally just walks up to me and starts explaining the history of the building that I was looking at. And I turned to him and I described this. I mean, this was like literally exactly how it happened. And then we just had a conversation, and he's from Liverpool, and I explained, I'm a journalist, I'm here to learn about tourism. And he was like, oh my God, like, well, I'm your guy, And I ended up spending like 3 or 4 hours with this dude. I mean, it's a little bit like, okay, you got to think about personal safety and all this kind of stuff. But but no, he was cool. And, you sort of make the decisions that you need to make. But it was great. And I had this fascinating and new perspective on Liverpool's history that was so human that I could not have gotten from my government, kind of interviews or like, official interviews. And then in Hawaii, like I really went, I went to this tourism conference at the Sheraton Waikiki, Brady Bunch Sheraton, really looking for somebody who would talk to me and spend time with me. And I found this fascinating and really like impressive and incredibly kind and hospitable man named Kuike, who then, I think it was a week later, I met him in his hometown, and he took me around and showed me around, and I spent that time with him. And he's somebody who has really, whereas this guy John in Liverpool was overtly positive about tourism and how it had changed his city, Kuike was the complete opposite. Like he really is like tourists should go home. But he said this, he was so kind and so polite and so hospitable and just really wanting to make sure I understood. So yeah, I don't know, open your, travel by yourself and keep some flexibility in your schedule and keep your mind open to all sorts of perspectives, including the ones that are going to challenge you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so in that scenario, like the Liverpool one, because I know you were in Hawaii visiting family, so you were there for a month, but as an author and you're going to a place and you have your interviews set up, like how much time do you give yourself in each place to capture what you need to capture? I'm just curious.
Yeah, as much time as possible. I mean, it's really like...
but you booked the trip in advance, right? So you have you have a week?
Yeah, so I know my flight in, flight out. I think Liverpool was like 4 or 5 days.
Okay.
So your arrival time and your departure time. And if I did touristy stuff too, right? I went to the Tate Liverpool and walked around this Liverpool One, the big kind of like pedestrian shopping zone. I walked up to the new football, soccer stadium that's being built. I checked out like a hotel that somebody had recommended to me. And I just did kind of touristy stuff too, because that's really important for me to like around in and around the interviews, to just experience the place as a tourist and to also, as a journalist, there's just kind of like a little bit of eavesdropping the people around you, like your fellow tourists. They're like, where are these people from? Like, what accents am I hearing? What does it sound like is motivating them? And just kind of be in the tourist like environment, with the tourists in their natural habitat, and experience that. So yeah, just like I am really, honestly, I like between like I book my flight, I book my hotel, I line up my big interviews, and then otherwise I keep my schedule as open as possible so that if like this guy, I bump into this guy, John, yeah, sure, I can spend 3 hours chatting with you, and just leave room for spontaneity, I guess.
And then do you write stuff down like immediately or while you're talking to him, or do you just go home and do it afterwards? You record stuff? How do you...
Yeah, a lot of notes, a lot of voice recording, a ton of voice recordings. I mean, for this guy John, and you ask people if it's okay to record, and I just have like I use the voice recorder on my phone, and I just have my phone like as we're walking along, I'm just like holding it like this and catching his voice, and that's really helpful. I go back and listen to that, and that's so helpful. I did that walking around Barcelona. I did that obviously with Kuike. I'm taking notes at the same time, but the things that I'll pull quotes from the transcript. Sometimes I write fast enough to get a full quote down in my notes, but mainly I'm just kind of writing down points. But yeah, and then of course we end up with just like days and like weeks worth of audio recording, which is not the most efficient. But usually I'll mark in my notebook like, okay, second John recording in Liverpool at the like 17-minute mark star. I'll write that in my notebook because I'll just look when he says something like, oh, wow, that was good. I look at the timer on my thing and I'm like, okay, 17 minutes, go back to that. That was good. So
okay. Yeah.
Trying to make it save me some time.
Yeah. And where do you, how do you transcribe it? Do you submit a voice recording to AI or something? Or
I subscribe to a service called Trent. TRINT.com, which I've just used as it's not the cheapest one, but you can do it in a lot of different languages. So because I do interviews in French as well, I can upload a French interview and then they spit out the French transcript. Or even a couple of times, like I've done interviews in like Spanish and Italian, two languages that I don't speak, but where I write my question in Google Translate, I read it, out to the person in Spanish or Italian, and then they respond and I catch their voice on the recording. I can upload that into their response in Italian or whatever, upload that into Trent. I get the Italian transcript and then I can put that into a translator and I come back with their English answers. That's like, it's not ideal, but like, when I've done that when I've had to. And it's just like, it's a way to have a conversation in a language you don't speak, which is helpful, but yeah, Trent is what I use. So
okay, cool, thanks. Yeah, I know I'm getting geeky with the process here, but I was just really curious because it's always fascinates me that authors can reconstruct these conversations, and it feels like you're right there. I mean, like, how do they do that?
Voice recorder.
I don't remember.
Voice recorder.
I remember the gist of conversations, but I can't remember.
Yeah, voice recorder. And then when I'm like, I'm just remembering my conversation with Kuike. So I have my voice recorder going and I'm just writing in my notes. I'm looking at him and I'm writing down, okay, necklace, beard, and then photos. I always ask, can I take a photo? Because like for those really, I'm taking notes on the things that I'm seeing with my eyes, right? That's what's going in my notebook, and like the minute marks on my recording device. So I can catch, and then I take photos and videos for the later visual descriptions that I'm going to write. Going back to be able to look like, oh my God, what color were his sandals again? Like, oh my God, or was his beard like short, trimmed, or long? I don't quite remember. You look at a photo, there it is. Yeah. And video is really helpful for like capturing the sense of a scene. You're in a scene, just do like, stand in one place and do a video around and you'll get the vibe and details that, the camera will catch details that you won't remember.
So you'll do like a video of area you walked or with the person as well, just to kind of, then you can go back and say all the beautiful descriptions you include in the book because you do a wonderful job in taking us there. I should mention the book again, The New Tourist. People should read it. It's awesome. So yeah, I guess in conclusion, I think we hit on a lot of the big points and some of the things we can do. But I mean, if you want to summarize it in like a sentence or two, what does it mean to be a new tourist?
What does it mean to be a new tourist? To be a new tourist is to explore the world with an open mind and an open heart and with a real curiosity and an eagerness to learn about your impacts on the place and your power as a tourist, the power that you carry as a tourist. But really like opening yourself up to having your mind changed and your heart broken, your heart like expanded, like really put yourself out there and educate yourself about your impacts on the place. And then like have the audacity to think you might be able to have a net positive impact when you travel, but really be humble about it and don't, really be humble about it.
Okay. People can get the book or they can actually click out on your website, PaigeMcClanahan.com, which we'll link to. Book was incredible. I definitely recommend it to everybody listening. I loved it. Yeah, before we part ways, can I ask you a few more questions about the future of tourism? If you can get out your crystal ball, because
Sure.
I think that, probably more well positioned than anybody, at least anybody that I know, to talk about this. All right, I'm not sure if you touched at all on AI. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts around AI in travel and how it might play into some of the topics we talked about today.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that's been on my mind, especially just these last like few weeks and months, because it's like all of a sudden, like, huge, like such a huge topic in travel and tourism. And when I was writing this manuscript, like kind of early mid 2023, 2022, like it wasn't even really part of the discussion even then. So I'm like, I feel like I need to add like an addendum or something for AI and travel, because I had a conversation just a couple of days ago with Pauline Fromer of like the Fromers, whose dad Arthur started the Fromers Guides, and she was saying, the struggle that they're having with it. The guidebooks now are like they're seeing in real time how their sales are being impacted by the advent of AI and how it changes, how people get information about a place. So, yeah, I mean, it's not something that I have looked at in depth, but gosh, it seems like it's going to have, maybe it makes me think of like that moment when Instagram first appeared in 2010. Like none of us could really anticipate the groundswell sort of effect it would have on the world of travel. I don't know. I need to do my research on that one, and that'll be a chapter in the next book, maybe.
Okay, cool. Last chance tourism, something you talked about in the book, or otherwise known as doom tourism, and that's you can explain what it is. And I'm just wondering if you think it will continue, or if you think if something around that will change.
Yeah, last chance tourism. That's definitely a topic that I knew, like right off the bat, I wanted to explore in the book. So the idea of last chance tourism is that, there are places that climate change is causing to disappear, tourist destinations that climate change is causing to disappear, namely glaciers, coral reefs, some kind of like Arctic landscapes. But the idea is that the last chance tourist is somebody who is motivated by the fact that this place is disappearing. And the very sort of ephemeral nature of it is actually what motivates them to want to go and see this like quick before it's gone. So I think it's fascinating. I think it's very complicated, obviously potentially deeply problematic. But there are also researchers out there who, I interviewed for the book, who have found that like, a visit to a disappearing glacier can have a really profound, doesn't necessarily always, but can have a really profound impact on a person in a way that can shift their intentions toward their own environmentally friendly behavior. So like if we want to inspire behavior change in people, is last chance tourism actually maybe like a way to do that, a way to go about that? Honestly, this is like, and reasonable and very well-informed people disagree on the answer to that question. So I wanted to unpack that a bit, but will it continue? Absolutely. I mean, I think, and as climate change gets more, like as the effects of climate change become more visible and more dramatic, there will be even more places that are, crumbling under the effects of, of this phenomenon. So there'll be even more potential destinations for the last chance tourist. So yeah, it's getting bigger. It's getting bigger for sure.
Okay. And traditionally, you think about tourists as the people that are coming in and out on a week by week basis. And I think, remote work, digital nomad movement, all of that. And now you're looking at somebody who's essentially might be living in the community for 3 months or 6 months or a year with some of these digital nomad visas. So they're almost becoming a local for a period of time. To me, that's sort of the next sort of evolution of travel. If we talked about kind of going back to what we talked about in the beginning, not that you have all the answers, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that trend, if that's something going to continue, if that's going to change the way we sort of tackle some of these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I know this is like a topic that you and I have talked about in the past, and one that I find fascinating. And what really strikes me in thinking about the digital nomad kind of situation is just how many governments are really actively looking to recruit digital nomads as a way to bring income into their economies.
It's like a new version of destination marketing, these visas,
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, so, when I look at that and it's like, okay, it's being led by, a lot of these things are being led by the government. The people who do it have to follow the government rules, apply for the visa, presumably their tax implications, depending on the place. So I would say like, I would put it in the box of like, could be a good thing, could introduce some important challenges, like proceed with caution, because that could serve a really important need for the government. Or even like a place like Estonia, they really overtly wanted digital nomads to come in to like bring life and energy into their kind of their intellectual economy. They wanted to bring in people who had different ideas and, could sort of stimulate the culture. And so it wasn't just the economic appeal. So, but are these people kind of causing gentrification, or are they like changing the fabric of neighborhoods? That is a question that government that decided to issue those visas needs to be spending a lot of time and money and like people hours thinking about and addressing. If I were a digital nomad or hoping to be a digital nomad, which is something, definitely I've been in that category. I'm not there now, but I've been in that category in the past. I would just choose my destination really carefully and try to choose a destination where I see the government putting in place regulations that are really explicitly there to make sure that my presence as a digital nomad isn't going to cause harm or do damage to the local community in any way. So choose a place that's being really thoughtful about it and where I feel like I can, and then when I go there as a digital nomad, I'm going to do my very best not to just hang out with my fellow digital nomad friends, but to get involved in the community in some way, like join a choir, I don't know, join a running club, like learn the language, right? And really try to get involved, be a community member, right? Join the community. So I'm sure I would be surprised if digital nomad visas and this kind of thing didn't continue to grow. But it's, again, just something we need to approach with caution,
Yeah.
but maybe with some optimism too.
Yeah, that's a good way to kind of approach it, I would say, because it can be tricky, and I don't fault digital nomads for this at all, but they will tend to congregate in places where a lot of nomads already are, because a big perk of the lifestyle is that you can meet other people who are into travel and who are running businesses, and you can help each other's businesses grow. And there's this business element to it and this community aspect. And going to a lesser known neighborhood in some residential area in whatever city where there's nobody around, that's great for connecting with locals, but it's not really helping you level up your business in the way you want to do it, because now you're traveling with your business and people are building them. So it adds a whole other layer to the thing, because they are going to congregate in places where they can have that inbuilt community. And that's what expats have done like a lot. You find these communities in Mexico or wherever where it's just like an expat bubble, and that's fine. But I think the business side of it changes it, because you need infrastructure to work, you need good internet, you want to have the community. And so there's this balance between having all that and then maybe ingratiating yourself locally as well.
Yeah, totally. I think, just the fact of being somebody who asked yourself that question and who has that in mind. And of course, like you need to do your job and you need to have friends with whom it's easy and you can speak in your native language, right? Like we all need that, like Christ, we all need that, At the same time, that doesn't prevent you from putting yourself out there and, joining a club or a group or something that's made up primarily of community members. So I would, as somebody who has lived, as an expat / immigrant in several countries in Africa and Europe, this is a line that I've tried to navigate. And, sometimes I don't always get it right, but, I think, striving for those community connections, even though it's going to be more challenging, it's going to be a really rewarding experience in the long run.
Yeah. Just wondering, on a personal note, your family moved from a small French village, essentially near the Alps, right, to the big city. How's that been for you?
Well, the Alps, so we had 5 years in the French Alps, which were beautiful and, like, honestly, the perfect place to ride out the pandemic, right? In this tiny little village in the mountains. The move to the city has been amazing. I'm so excited to be in Paris. I love just like the walkability of the city. And just speaking of this kind of expat versus immigrant kind of dichotomy, maybe like here in Paris, we're in a neighborhood that's we're in the 19th arrondissement, which is in the sort of northeastern corner of the city. It's very residential, not an expat sort of neighborhood at all. And it feels like so much more of a French experience than what we had in the village, where there's a small but not insignificant kind of group of Brits and Dutch and Americans mainly who are living there, who we would see around a lot socially, in addition to French friends of ours. But here, my life in Paris is so French. Like, oh my gosh, they're like at my daughter's school. There are no other families that speak English at home. There are families that speak all sorts of other languages at home that aren't French, right? But it's, so I feel here very much like an immigrant, and it's been a different experience kind of settling in, but I have loved it. And I have found it so enriching. And just to be in a city and the kind of the culture and life and vibrancy, of course, of a city is wonderful. So I'm really enjoying it.
Well, congratulations on the move. Congratulations on the book. I will plug it one more time, because we do here, The New Tourist, Waking Up to the Power and Perils of Travel. Can't recommend it enough. Look forward to having you back again, because it's always a pleasure, Paige. Thank you so much. And on a personal note, thanks for all the sort of friendship and just support you've given me with the podcast and different questions I have and helping me out. I should mention also the Better Travel podcast, still out there. You're a podcast host as well, so we'll link to that and people can listen to your show. And yeah, is there anything else? Did I miss anything? Or PaigeMcClanahan.com? That's the hub.
That's great, Jason.
Wow, those are all the things?
Amazing. Just mainly just the book. I would be so thrilled for people to read the book and reach out to me, hello@PaigeMcClanahan.com. If you read the book and want to start a conversation with me, please send me an email. I will respond. I promise you. If you have a book club and you want me to speak, to your book club via Zoom or whatever, I am so excited to have this conversation. So please reach out to me directly. I always love hearing from readers. And yeah, book is out on June 18th.
What's next? I mean, are you going to write another book?
That's a good question. I think probably I will. I'm still chewing on the topic.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I look forward to hearing more about that. And thank you.
Thank you, Jason. It's been so much fun.
There you go. Special thanks to Paige McClanahan. I'm so lucky to call her a friend and couldn't be more thrilled to recommend this book. I really loved it. The New Tourist, Waking Up to the Power and Perils of Travel. If you want a deep dive into tourism, you're going to love this, and it's so well written. So please enjoy that book and pick it up. I mentioned at the top that I'm going to highlight a moment from this conversation that might make you breathe a sigh of relief. And that moment is when Paige was just super vulnerable, just being herself and talking about how she was scared to write the book. She didn't really know how it would get done, how it would come together. And this ties back in with that idea of imposter syndrome, I think, is something we all have experienced. We feel like, oh, well, who are we to do this? And, this is coming from a professional journalist and writer who already has a book deal. And, she was scared about the book and figuring out how to get it done. So it's just a great reminder that, we can breathe a sigh of relief and know that even these experts out here, these incredibly talented people, they have the same emotions that we all do. And when you get into new projects, just keep that in mind. Don't let the not knowing of how it's going to get done stop you from doing it. Just don't let it stop you. Just move forward. We all are trying our best. And even those people that you might, look up to don't really know exactly how things are going to come together. So don't let not knowing stop you from doing what you want to do. I just wanted to throw that out there. I'll leave you with a quote in just a second. First, one last thing. 3 lessons from a recent trip I took. I was so fortunate to spend several days traveling with my aunt and uncle from California. And we went to Western Norway and we traveled through Flåm, which is this beautiful valley. If you take the train from Oslo to Bergen and you get off in Myrdal, you can pick up another train that is a special train. It's kind of like an old style train with wood and everything like that. And you take that train up to Flåm. It's about 20 kilometers or something like that. You pass by this waterfall. I won't ruin it for you if you do this, but ultimately you end up in this incredible scenic journey, and then you end up in Flom. And Flom is quite a cruise ship hotspot, let me tell you. I read in a pamphlet I came across in one of the churches that was near where we were staying. This church was built in 1600, and the pamphlet said there's something like 200 cruise ships that come through Flom yearly. So it's one of those places where it's completely different if you spend the night. And that is one of the first lessons I wanted to share here. If you spend the night, stay overnight, at least one night, in a popular day tripping place. I've done this in several places throughout the world. You get a totally different experience. And I don't know, I get excited by that. If you're going to end up in those places anyway, if you can find a way to spend a night or two and you get past sort of the daily rush of tourists, you really get to kind of experience the place for what it is. Locals and, things are calm. It's just a completely different vibe. And I think it's good for the place too. People are coming in and, spending money here and there, and maybe they're only spending the day. But if you're spending a couple nights, you're probably shopping in the grocery store. Maybe you're doing things a little bit differently. And along the lines of some of the things we discussed today, I think that can be a really good thing. And it can be a fun thing as a traveler. So that's just something I wanted to throw out there as an idea. If you're passing through a busy place like that and you have the ability to spend a night or two to see what it's like on the other side of the day tripping madness, then do it. It's a fun thing. Secondly, staying a little bit outside of town, I would say particularly in a small but popular place like we were. So we got to stay outside of Flom, about 3.5 kilometers outside of the main area where the cruise ships park up and the fjord tours leave and all that stuff, the sort of the hot spot tourism area. And we were 3.5 kilometers out in what was essentially like the outskirts of town, staying at a cabin. This woman had 2 cabins with her daughter on her property. Beautiful view with waterfalls and just such a great vibe. And it was just a lovely walk to be able to kind of commute in and out of town, walk those 3.5 kilometers. We even did a hitchhike, my aunt and uncle's first hitchhiking experience. We got to grab a ride from a German guy in a camper van who gave us a lift to town just for the fun of it. And you just get a different experience. You kind of, you feel like maybe you're a bit more connected to that slower pace, I should say, of the town. So the idea of staying a little bit outside of town in a small popular place can be fun. It can save you money too. Okay. Lastly, and this is just sort of an overarching travel thing, and I know you know this, but it's worth reminding you, it's worth mentioning, because even in scenarios when you don't think it would work, it still can. And that is not being afraid to ask for what you want. Just ask. You never know when people are going to say yes. And I'll give you a specific example. When we got to Miradal, which was the stopover point to pick up the train to Flom, I didn't have a train ticket until like 4 hours from them. Like, we were going to have to wait in the rain for 4 hours, basically. It was cold. It was rainy. It was packed inside the station. It just would have been super annoying. It was because I screwed up the booking. But that's another story. So anyway, we got there, and I knew there were like several trains coming before then. So I just talked to somebody. I said, hey, can we just get on the next train? Like, I know it's only 1 o'clock and our ticket's for 5 o'clock, but can we, just get on the next train so we don't have to wait here? And they said, well, you have to talk to the conductor. So the train came up, talked to the person in the green jacket. I found a friendly looking conductor in a green jacket, and I just asked them the same question. Hey, like, there's just 3 of us. We'd rather, get there. We don't mind standing. We don't need a seat or anything like that. She said it was no problem. So we were able to jump right on that next train. And, some things I asked for and I didn't get. Like, I bought my wife a piece of jewelry for our anniversary in Bergen, and I asked for a cheaper price and she didn't give it to me. So, you never know, but you definitely will not get what you want if you don't ask. So that saved us a ton of time. Of course, asking can save you money if you're able to get discounts and things like that. just don't be afraid to ask. And one more example, we even asked our neighbors to give us a ride to town the day we were leaving because we weren't sure we could get a taxi. There were only 2 taxis in the whole town. I called the guy, he was really busy. He's like, oh, I think you can get a taxi. I'm like, all right, that's not really good enough for me. We got to catch a bus. And so we had some neighbors in the cabin next to us that were from the Netherlands, and they were on a mountain biking trip. I said, hey, would you guys mind if we can just jump in and get a ride with you to town? And they said it was no problem. So saved us some money there on a taxi. So, just don't be afraid to ask. Okay, that's my rant for the day. I'll leave you with this quote from Salvador Dali. I'm just picturing his mustache right now. What a beautiful mustache. Okay, he said, have no fear of perfection. You'll never reach it. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by ZeroToTravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.